All right, I've just started recording and welcome. Welcome to this session on recruiting and training a stewardship team. It's a part of the Diocese of California fourth Thursday stewardship series. And I am glad that you're here on this chilly April evening. Tonight, we're going to walk through a few different things, and I hope that these will be our learning objectives. That we will understand what the role of a stewardship committee is. It has, like any committee, a charter, a fixed area of influence and work. It's not an everything committee, it's a stewardship committee. So some boundaries and some help in what to expect. We'll be talking a little bit about jobs of committee members, and I will have a resource that I will share with you after this of actual job descriptions on the different components of a stewardship committee that you might want. So we have those fleshed out, and I'm happy to share them with you. We'll be talking a little bit about the formation, the theological formation that could go into your stewardship committee. What I mean by this is that you are all here not just to help a congregation to raise money, but also to form a cohort of generosity to lead the congregation's efforts in being more generous and being more capacious. And so we'll give you some formation that you can use for your team to help inculcate those skills and to support your own ministry. And then finally, we'll be talking a little bit about how you can help the vestry and your finance committee set goals that will be successful for your congregation's fundraising. The role of a stewardship team is not the fundraising committee. So what I mean by that is that you are here not just to for a purpose of raising money or making a goal. While we hope that that will be a result of your work, we hope that your actual purpose will be to help the congregation feel encouraged, feel supported, to use all the gifts that God has given them in all the ways that we have to honor God. So that brings to mind our financial resources, our resources of time, our wisdom and shared experience. You are here to help the church fulfill its ministry and support it. And this helps us understand that the stewardship committee isn't on the hook to meet a goal or to ensure the church's financial security. You are here to do even more important work, which is to help the congregation learn how to be generous and to feel supported in that work. Yes, we hope that your pledge drives will also be successful because of that. The pledge drive campaign is a practical, it's your practical team charged with communicating this year's theme and a plan to raise operating funds for the church. So every congregation, well, not every congregation, but many develop a theme around which they hang their pledge campaign. It can be a piece of scripture, or it can be a metaphor. This helps us focus our conversation, or maybe it highlights a piece of ministry or highlights a particular gift of the Spirit, any of those things that we use to sort of develop a theme. Your role on the stewardship team is to also help in creating the materials for the case for giving. We're going to be having later in the summer kind of a deeper dive into creating your case statements. We'll be talking about maybe that trifold brochure that you use, or a narrative budget, or tips and tricks for your stewardship website. how to market your fundraising program in church. So we'll be talking about that, but part of your role on this committee is to help advise that work. We want everyone to be in alignment about the message and the team and the purpose of stewardship and generosity in your congregation. And so often the stewardship committee is sort of pushed off to do its work and come back with a plan and ready to implement it. And what I'm saying by this alignment is that I'm suggesting and hoping that we get early on with your treasurer or finance committee, with the communications team, the folks who do your newsletter or your website at church, so that you can all be aligned in the mission and messaging of your generosity campaign this year. The earlier we begin that work and the more collaborative that work is in our congregation, the more we can get that message across to everyone. If we're all using the same talking points, if we're all using the same method and focus, it helps everyone stay in a direction when it comes to this. So alignment is a part of the work of the stewardship team. Of course, there are some really practical pieces of the work as well. The rollout of the campaign, creating the timeline, creating your structure. By structure, I mean, how do you want to engage your campaign this year? Is it going to be an every member canvas where everyone gets a phone call or a visit? Is it going to be small groups where people meet in house churches or on virtual small groups to talk about stewardship? Are you going to do some minutes for mission in your Sunday worship? You're going to do coffee hours that are about your stewardship. What is the structure for that? And how does everybody get a pledge form? And how do they return it? And all that. So that piece of work, setting that up and thinking it through, is a big piece of the work of a stewardship team. And then finally, the acknowledgement and the follow-up. So I think that that every gift should have at least 2 thank yous, one from the clergy and one from the committee. And that means some handwritten notes or some well-thought emails that go out, text messages that say we received your gift and we're really grateful. Whatever the most personal way is that you have of communicating gratitude, that piece of work after the campaign is done is a really important part to help close things out and end it on a note of gratitude, which is hopefully also how it began. Many congregations plan events around or during their pledge campaign or their stewardship season. And this is great. We love to have parties. We love to get people together. And if it's your tradition in your congregation to do some sort of kickoff event or a dedication Sunday at the end or an in-gathering Sunday or a thank you dinner, the various kinds of really wonderful programs that many of our congregations engage. I want to give you a little help with that. It takes a lot of energy to plan an event. It's also exciting and it's fun because it's about food and tables and bringing people together. It should be the work of a few people or a small team of your committee, not the whole committee. And I say that because it does take a lot of resource and energy to plan an event. And if everybody's doing that work, it can become exhausting and it can leave other parts of the campaign, like creating the materials or following up on the website or doing the sorts of formation pieces. It can sometimes leave those things off if everybody's focused on the event. So do your event, especially if it's a tradition but do dedicate a team to making it happen, and don't have it be the work of the entire committee. That team can pull in other members of the congregation to help as they need to. But please do try to save some people on your stewardship committee for the other work of your stewardship committee. So how do you recruit people to this team, this very important team? Often we invite people who have done it before. So, oh, you were on stewardship last year. Will you do it again this year? That's great. They have experience. If they had a positive experience, we hope that they might stay on and do the work. Sometimes we recruit people because we need people. And we haven't always thought through, well, would they make a good stewardship team? Would they be the right people for this committee? So I caution, as I would with any committee structure, not just to bring people on so that you have enough people to satisfy your goal, but to really think about the people who have a heart for this ministry, who want to do this ministry, who feel comfortable, or have the skills that this ministry needs. I think that if you have the capacity to invite people to do this work in person, a coffee, a phone call, catching someone after church, if you can do this work and intentionally invite them and sit them down and appreciate them and invite them into this committee work, that it will be so much more authentic and wonderful, and people will feel supported off the bat. I think this is really important. The more seriously we treat the recruitment process, the more we communicate the importance of this committee. And I want to really emphasize that this is hard work. It's beautiful work. I love raising money for church. It's what I've done. It's what I do in my career. It's also my form of service and ministry to my church. I enjoy it. Not everybody does, and not everybody has to. We all have gifts. We all have things we excel at and things we would rather stay far away from. When it comes to your stewardship committee, invite the people who will be successful at it and see it as a blessing. I've seen stewardship used, and I've seen it in nonprofit boards as well, where they put new people, like the new vestry members, serve on the stewardship committee, whether or not they have a heart for it or not. And so I always wonder about that. Well, is this like a rite of passage? Is it some sort of hazing ritual? What are we doing to these people when we say you have to serve on the stewardship committee first? So I just caution us to think about this committee and the important work it does, and bring people onto it. Another thing about the committee itself and the role of it, it's my hope that we recruit committees that stay from year to year. Yeah, some people may drop off after a while or cycle through, but that the entire committee doesn't need to reform itself every year, that it sticks around throughout the year and puts on or creates moments for formation and education about stewardship as the year continues, so that we can keep some continuity. It takes a lot of work to form a stewardship team, and if we have to start that work every year from scratch, it's just that much more work that we have to do to get into it. So I'm hoping that we all can train and recruit people who want to stick with this ministry for a while. It's not to say they can't change after a while and do something new in the church, but stick around for a few years, get a couple of cycles, learn how it works, enjoy the ministry, lean into it, and get better at it each year. I'm often asked, how big should a stewardship team be? And I usually answer that question with a question. How big is your congregation, and what is your plan to ask them to participate in your stewardship this year? If you are doing an all-in-one campaign where you do it for a few weeks and you try to hit everybody in the congregation in that time frame, then you need to treat this as sort of a case management approach and have enough people on your committee that they can reasonably reach out to a number of people and have intentional, deliberate, and timely conversations about stewardship. So that's to say, I think it's reasonable that a single person could manage 15 at the maximum number of households or people in a 4 to 6 or 8 week campaign. Think about how long it takes, especially in the Bay Area, to get someone's attention. You send them an email, a text message, a phone call. I need to get with you. Can we have some coffee? That might take a few weeks to schedule in and of itself. And then the ask or the conversation about participating in stewardship. So if that's your timeline, you have to think that through. How many people can you manage in that cycle? If your approach is different, where you're on a rolling stewardship, you might need a smaller committee because you're always working a smaller number of people. If your approach is that you do all big events or all small groups, just have a committee that is right-sized for that work. Too few, and it will overburden the people who have said yes. And well, I don't think you can have too many, but in some feasible universe, maybe there are too many people to be on a stewardship committee, and they could be better used in other ministries. Find the right spot for your congregation based on the number of people you need to reach and the kinds of intensity you have in your program. This is a really important part of our stewardship, I think. According to Dan Edwards, who's just retired from being the Bishop of Nevada, he says our stewardship committee should be in place by Easter. Well, okay, we've a little bit missed that here, but we are not far behind. What does this mean? What is the team? An effective team will raise more money to fund the church's mission. This is the essential work of our stewardship in a congregation. We will engender the support and appreciation for all the other parish ministries. We are cheerleaders in a sense. We are here to support all the ministries of our church, make everybody feel supported, excited, prepared, and well-resourced so that the other things in our churches that need to happen can happen. The project is a chance for members of the team to form or deepen relationships within themselves that are the lifeblood of the congregation. This is how, this is a very pastoral approach, and I love it because when our stewardship team becomes its own cohort, its own pastorally focused group, supporting each other in the mutual ministry of stewardship, it can function so much better for our congregations. As we've talked about before in this series, our money and conversations about money in church carry a lot of stuff attached to them. We put all kinds of hopes, fears, joys, delights, worries, anxieties on our money and the performance of our money. And when we talk with our friends, the people in our congregation, about their gifts to the church, we bring up deep issues that aren't just about how much or what is an appropriate pledge or participation in the church, but also we talk about their lives, their health, their families, their retirement, their children's education, all the things that go into our into our money, or that we express through our money. I like to think that the committee itself needs to be really strong and needs to feel supported, because they take on a lot of that stuff that our congregations talk about. Those conversations become pastoral in a way, and a pastoral conversation needs some support within us and some support around us in order to feel comfortable holding that information that we receive. That's not to say that we pry or that we ask too many impersonal questions about other people's stewardship, but we do want to form ourselves so that we're well supported. Finally, our stewardship committees spread a spirituality of grateful generosity, which thereby enriches the lives and enlarges the souls of our congregation. This is that work that we were talking about, especially in our last session when we were doing year-round stewardship formation. Our job is to help our congregations form their own gratitude and capacity theologies. How can we help them do the deep, beautiful work of formation in stewardship? I want to stop for a minute before we move on with talking about our teams, and ask you to share some of your experiences about having been recruited for a team, having served on a team, the kinds of conversations that you have. I'm going to bring us back into the room, and then we'll go on with the presentation in a bit. But I'd love to hear from some of you. What experiences do you have that have been helpful or have been awkward on serving on a team in the past in your stewardship experience? You're gonna leave me hanging here?
Well, I am Anita. I'm from Trinity Menlo Park.
Hi, Anita.
Hi. We have a bit of a challenge in that I think, well, we've had a rector, a series of 3 different, now we're on our 3rd rector, and it's an interim rector pending search for a permanent rector. But when I joined the committee, the rector was largely in charge of stewardship, and the team was, I didn't see much of a, I didn't have the sense that the team was formed based on the qualifications or the interests that you described. So I'm, really very interested in hearing about, what, apart from enthusiasm, I mean, there are elements of confidentiality, elements of leadership among the congregation that I think are important. And I was wondering if those are topics that you might touch on.
Sure. Yeah, we'll talk about that this evening, and we can talk about that now. Um, the
I,
question, oh, go
I
on.
didn't preempt you. I
What's
didn't mean to preempt, I didn't mean to preempt or steal your sequence.
No, you're wonderful. Thanks for asking. Um, Questions of confidentiality are really important in the work of stewardship. Some in part because of what I just talked about, the pastoral issues that come up when we talk about people's money, but also because it's people's money, right? And so we have a certain amount of respect for how people want their generosity to be known and to be shared with a wider audience, and what that means. Everybody has a different threshold for that. And so we have a few common boundaries that we like to think about. In general, I think it's best if numbers and names are separated from reporting and conversation to all but the perhaps some of the clergy and perhaps the treasurer who has to send out reminders and keep track of who or whoever that is in your congregation, if it's a pledge secretary or a treasurer or who does your billing statements or your pledge statements. That person gets to see. But in general, when we're talking about numbers and people, we like to keep them separate. I think it's really important because what we don't want is for anyone to be singled out or identified. Now, you can often look at a stewardship distribution and know pretty much, because you know each other. You can probably guess who's giving at this amount or at that amount. But when it's not explicitly linked, there's an expectation of privacy there that I think is really important. I do think it's really helpful, though, to talk about the numbers. And I like to think about it in ranges, or if you look at a distribution of gifts. So we have 5 people who make gifts of 10,000 and above. We have 4 people or 4 households who give at this level or whatever. And if you look at levels like that and you look at number of pledges or some breakdown, then we can begin to see how our own, we always are looking for where we sit, right? Where do I sit in terms of my neighbors? And what would it, I can dream then, what would it look like if I moved up a level? Or how much harder would the church have to work if I moved down a level to compensate for my gift, right? So either way we look at that, it helps us understand our own gifts, and it helps us value that, not in that we value people more than others, but that we really pay attention to how our gifts come in. Now, that can also be dangerous, right? I mean, if one person or one family has all the power and we know it, it can be a really messy dynamic in church. And so we have to look at that. I think the other question, I just want to name it now, the other question that comes up whenever we talk about pledges and confidentiality is about clergy. And what clergy know or what they don't know about who gives and how much they give. I will say this every time I have this conversation, that it is my position that the clergy should know who pledges and what they pledge. This is not so that they play favorites or that they, we should trust that the clergy have good boundaries and that they can deal with that information in a good way. And that's really important to us. Just as we tell the clergy about the deep and painful and beautiful moments in our own lives, we should also be able to entrust them to know what we give. It's also really important because, let's face it, Episcopalians often communicate through their pledge what's going on in their lives. And that's not just, do I like the sermons or am I happy with the priest or not, but do I feel a part of this community? Is it resonating with me? That's one of the things that we look for sometimes in our when we look at people's pledges. We also, if a family is tapering off really quickly, it might be a chance to ask for the clergy to say, what's going on? Is there a medical issue? Are you okay? We sometimes will change our pledge before we tell the clergy that there's something huge going on in our lives. And so this is a way to help our clergy know what's going on. The transparency of that, however, that the clergy and the treasurer, and I don't know if your stewardship committee may or may not know, if a few people know, but not everyone, it helps keep the honesty in that. What you don't want is for a situation where only one person knows all of the data. So you don't want just the clergy to know or just the treasurer to know. Should always be at least one other voice in that. And that's to make sure that, well, I mean, we're talking about money, right? We're talking about money and we're talking about checks and we're talking about how it comes in. And so if suddenly the wealthiest family who usually is writing these big checks, we stop seeing them come in, we might say, are those checks not being cashed? Are they going somewhere else? It helps us understand about our systems. And that's a really important piece too, because we are dealing with money and there's temptation when there's money. And as good of people as we are, it's also good to be safe and to take care of our community when we think about our money.
Yeah, I mean, our I don't know, I mean, you probably, maybe you're speaking to us, but we have had issues with misappropriation of funds. So it's helpful we've had to kind of reconstitute in the aftermath of that.
Yeah, Anita, I think many of us do know about Trinity and what's happened there. And I'm glad that you're in a rebuilding phase.
We are, yeah.
And keeping each other accountable is a part of that process. It's part of our Christian promise to each other.
You know, I want to jump in there. And Anita, it's got to be so hard for your church to be rebuilding trust again. And I want to acknowledge that I don't know the details, but I do know the broad brush, and it's got to be rough. One of the things that we explicitly do, or a role we explicitly want our stewardship committee to do, and we do share the actual pledge information with our rector. And Davey, you hit it on the nose. Sometimes somebody will say, well, I don't want the rector to know. And, we'll just turn around and say, if you were having marital problems, would you want the rector to know? If you were sick, if you trust him with this, so that's exactly the conversation we've had. And people are uncomfortable, perhaps, but nobody has ever said, well, I insist that my pledge be anonymous. Occasional gifts will be, but not a pledge. We had a much smaller problem a couple of years ago that involved a staff member. And, we dealt with it reasonably easily. It wasn't a big rebuilding thing. But because we could point to how quickly we caught on because a number of people were involved. But the way we could point at our stewardship committee and our rector as mutually keeping each other tuned in. And it's not really an audit function as much as it really goes back to the concern about, well, if I give more money, should I be treated better?
Mm.
Oh,
And I'll tell you, if there's a question, because yeah, in a congregation, most of the time people know who your big givers are. And if there's ever a question, anybody in our committee sure feels free to talk to our rector and say, you know, it seems like you're getting a little deferential. And that has not, it doesn't happen, but people actually look for it. And so it's a way we can ask ourselves the question about that. But anyway, the thing I wanted to add about nuts and bolts on our committee, we always want to make sure that we have a variety of giving levels represented on our stewardship committee. Because one mistake, I haven't seen churches make it as often as I've seen nonprofits make it, is saying, well, we need to put our biggest giver on the stewardship committee. And one, that person might not have the gifts to ask for money and to talk with people, and might have some other issues, might be a good person, but might not be a good person. But it's been really important to have people on the stewardship committee that are stretching to give $100 a year or $500 a year, relatively small, but they're giving at a level of their own deep generosity.
right.
And then, yeah, you want somebody who's giving big bucks, because it's nobody's better at asking somebody who you need to give big bucks than somebody else who's giving big bucks. I mean, you know, so we have found that a balance of representation on our committee has made a big difference.
Thanks, Lacey, for saying that. I think that's a great point. A diversity of different levels of giving, which is not to say different levels of engagement, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just a different, and it gives support to the people who are making their own sacrificial gift at a level that others might think is modest, to see that representation on the stewardship committee as much as it does some of our biggest donors. The other thing we know about our biggest donors is that they may make wonderfully large, generous donations, but they might not actually be the best or most generous people. They can be the best people, but not the most generous people. They're just giving a lot, right? Because they have a lot. And that's a beautiful thing, and churches need it, but that doesn't mean that they're more generous than people who are giving from their own wealth in the ways that stretch them. So I think it's a really good thing to have a lovely diversity on our committees. Thank you for mentioning that and bringing that up. Yeah, Victoria.
That is a,
To say, along with the diversity of giving capacity and generosity, we've found it's important. Well, we haven't had a very active or a big stewardship committee in a few years, and that's something we've got to bring back to the fore. But when we do form one, we want to be sure we get a good variety of age group. You know, we tend to put on the older parishioners because generally, I don't know, I guess because, you know, they're the people with more time, they're the people that are sometimes more involved, but we're making a very concerted effort at St. John's to bring on in people who are as young as 25, and, you know, lots of people in their 40s. We want to be sure we have people in there who are raising children. You know, we just want a huge variety of parishioners. We don't want it just to seem like a club of some of the old timers or whatever, which is easy to do. And frankly, because I'm often involved and I'm in my 60s, it's easy to have that happen even when you're not trying to make it happen that way. So we're in a
Yeah.
new live to be sure we have a variety of ages.
Victoria, thank you so much for saying that, because as we, and later this summer, we're going to talk even more about sort of generational differences in giving, particularly about motivations to give. Your millennials have a different reason for giving to the church than your boomers. Your boomers understand institution and they give to it's not a hard and fast rule, but in general, boomers give to institutions because they believe in them, because they've supported them, because they've been taught to support them, right? Millennials give to impact. They want to see, what are you doing with my money? So they speak a different language when it comes to stewardship, and having both of those represented on your stewardship committee will help you when you're making your case statement. It'll help you when you're thinking about your strategy, because how you ask for money in a church really matters, and it matters to different people in different ways. I think one of the things that, and we'll talk again later this summer in a more deep way about it, but we often have one approach to our pledge campaigns. We write a really compelling letter, or we give the best sermon ever, or what we do one of those things, right? We don't do all of those things because each of them takes its own amount of time and energy. But we need a big, wide approach to how we ask people to participate in stewardship, because different constituencies, if I can use that word, see giving in different ways, and they see their impact in different ways. And so I really applaud you for making an intentional practice of having different generations on your stewardship committee. I look forward to hearing how it helps you, or what your experience is with that, because it's really important, I think. Wonderful. I'm going to go back into our slide presentation and list a few more attributes of the types of people we look for, and then then I will ask for more questions, unless there's one right now before we
Davey, I've got a real quick terminology question.
Yep.
You referred to capacity theology. I've not heard that term before. Can you tell me what it means?
I use capacity and generosity kind of as synonyms. So when we look at our capacity, it's about our ability to open up, our ability to engage and to be open, and our transformation. So it's not about prosperity. It's not that kind of a capacity theology. It's about, how do we become more capacious? How do we become more open and generative and generous people?
Okay, thanks. That's
for
helpful.
asking that. Thank you for asking that. All right, I'm going to move back into our slide presentation, and then we'll come back in for some more chat. We want to invite people who are people, right? So people who feel comfortable talking with others. That's not to say that there isn't room for introverts on your team. I'm an introvert. I love stewardship. So your introverts can be good people to have on your committee. But folks who know others, who have good friendships, who have big networks within your congregation, they are great connectors. They're automatic connectors of people and community. Invite that kind of a person to serve on your stewardship committee. Victoria just talked about diversifying the team according to demographics like age, gender identity, racial identity, generational identity. These are really important things. So do have a diverse team. If it's all one group, then that's the message that you're sending. That's who you're going to be talking to. So have everyone represented on your committee. If the congregation has more than one worship service, make sure that you include people from different worship services on the team. This goes back, maybe this is also a generational piece, right? So if it's just the 11 o'clockers who will serve on stewardship committee and not the people with young families, then reaching out to those young families is that much harder. So make sure your 8 o'clock and your 9 o'clock and your at 11 o'clock folks are all able to serve on, have some representation. If you have specialized groups that have a particularly big following, a morning prayer group or a Wednesday evening or an EFM group, have someone from your choir be on your stewardship committee. Look at the people who are involved in deep networks and deep ministry in your congregation, because they will bring along the people who are with them in that EFM group or that Stephen ministry group or that Bible study group that is really on fire on Tuesday afternoons or whatever it is. Invite those people to serve on your stewardship committee. You want your natural leaders, and that's not to say just the people that you've elected to serve on your vestry or appointed to other ministry head positions, but people who have that natural leadership, the people who shamelessly stand up and make announcements for the walk that they're a part of or the fundraiser that they're doing. That's a person that you want to be on the stewardship committee, because you know they can lead people and inspire people. The folks who always show up to do mission and ministry, you know, they are great people to invite on your stewardship committee because they understand service. They can motivate others. So you want your natural leaders to be on your committee. And you want people who have a heart for stewardship. So not everybody is born to raise money, and not everybody is comfortable asking for it. So don't force the issue. This is not a round peg, square hole thing. People who feel that they can do it or are willing to learn, yes, we can always teach and bring this new skill to people, but they have to have an interest and a willingness and a heart. If somebody's really, really meek about talking about money and church, they're probably not the right people to serve on your stewardship committee. There are other great ministries in the church for them to be a part of. One of the things that you can tell in somebody who has heart-centered leadership is that they have a certain shamelessness for the mission, and that they will ask anyone as long as it is about furthering the mission. They'll ask for whatever. A little fact about me: my hands, my palms always sweat when I'm going to ask someone for money. Been doing this for 25 years. If I'm asking for $5 or $5 million, I still get nervous. But you know, I can put the mission, whatever it is that I'm trying to raise money for, ahead of me, and I can wear that. Maybe it's armor, or maybe it's a shining light. I don't know what it is. But when I put that on, it makes me feel shameless and I can go forward. It's not me asking for a gift for myself. It's God working through me, asking for a gift for the church. And then I can do all kinds of things that otherwise it would make me feel ridiculous. So be a fool for God, be shameless. We can do this work because we care about the mission, and we can put that forward. Finally, stewardship is about more, and I keep saying this, it's about more than the campaign. It is about the entire picture of generosity and abundance that leads us into Christian community. When we think about our stewardship as stewarding all of our resources, gathering everything together so that we can build up the ministry in our church and serve the people that we are called to serve, it helps us understand what our role is and why we're doing it. Finally, rounding out your team. Get some people on there who know how to do things, who can get things done. I always say, if you want something done, ask a busy person to do it, because they know how to manage time, they know how to get people, and they know how to delegate, right? That's a good skill too. So people with skills, people who can organize a meeting, who can take good minutes and notes and set up action items, invite that person on your committee. People who have credibility. So that's not to say that some of us are shifty and others are approachable, but have someone in your church that everybody trusts, that person that people know, that when they join something, people lead and follow because they understand that person as a truth teller or as a person whose credibility is important to the congregation. People with time. So stewardship asks a lot, and especially if it's done in a campaign and that work is intense for a short period of time, it asks a lot of us during those weeks. So you want someone who has the time to commit to it. If they are always having to be gone, if they travel a lot for work, or if they're trying to raise 4 kids and get them all to every activity all the time, and they are frenetic, this might not be the year for them to be on the stewardship committee. Give them time to do the other things that they need to do in their life, and bring them back in when they have time to give this, because it does take time and effort. And of course, people who can give themselves. This goes back to Lisi's point that whatever you give is important. So it doesn't have to be your biggest giver, but we should invite people onto the stewardship committee or into this ministry who make a regular gift to their church in whatever way. This is because it helps us with our authenticity. The first rule in asking for funds is to have given your own first. It just means that you can honestly look someone in the eye and say, I've supported this and I'm asking you to join me in supporting this. When you can honestly say that, then you are deeply into the work that we are called to do and being authentic about it. So that doesn't mean you have to make the biggest gift. It just means you have to make a gift. And that really helps. It helps you when you approach someone, and it helps them understand, okay, this is somebody who's willing to do this as well and willing to engage in this. Before we go into the next step, which is about formation, I wanted to ask if there were any other questions that people have about who should serve on a team, or how you recruit or identify people. Any questions?
Davey, you hinted at it before, but I want to underline it. We always look for people who have a pastoral touch. Not necessarily everybody on the committee, because we really see the ministry of stewardship as so closely tied into the pastoral ministry of the church. Noticing patterns of giving and that sort of thing, that we want to avoid having people who are uncomfortable enough with themselves that they can't listen with that compassionate heart. And I think it's important to remember that the ministry of stewardship is a pastoral ministry.
Yeah, well said. And thank you for putting it that way. It is a pastoral ministry. And listening is the first role in stewardship, right? We We really want to know, when we talk about giving, we want to know somebody's story about their church and who they are and what motivates them. And we ask those kinds of questions to open it up. The question isn't, what can I put you down for this year? The question is, what do you love about this church? What are how can I support you in this work? What would you like to know more about in the church? What can I do for you? So it's really that pastoral work. And thank you for putting it that way. It's so important to do that. Just like you want your doctor to have a good bedside manner, you want your stewardship folks to feel trustworthy and authentic and open-minded, open-hearted, open-eared, so that we can really participate with someone. Thank you. So I've talked about making certain that we form our own selves in this work so that we can then form the congregation in this work. One of the tools that I love for this is the money autobiography. And I will put it in the email that I send you all later. I will give you links to the money autobiography that TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, recommends. It's a 13 question conversation starter that helps us tell our own story, which isn't always a happy one. It can be a complicated one, a difficult one, a joy-filled one. The story of our money and how we feel and experience it. When we do this work in a small group like a stewardship team, we can really help each other feel supported, and we can identify with the people in our congregation that we are asking to participate with us in stewardship. Our budgets and our finances are mirrors into ourselves. They help us understand where our own priorities lie, where we have rough edges and where we have big walls and where we are open. So when you look at your budget, what do you see? What do you see about your buying choices? How do you make decisions? How do you make decisions about what you save and how you save it? What are your priorities? What are your negative and positive experiences? Your stories of shame, pride, and struggle. We were talking about this on Sunday with a group that was doing the College for Bishops Project Resource Spring Training. And it's a 6-week stewardship series that a team of us are going through. And when one person shared their story of money, it was about shame. And it wasn't their own shame, it was shame about family stuff, right? And we carry that with us. Those are early memories of money and early experiences of money. And we talk about that and we carry that out into new generations, right? So when we do this work of trying to engage our own spiritual money autobiography, we unlock those pieces of ourselves that we feel good about or that we don't feel good about. And then we can understand each other and we can help each other work through it. If we form ourselves, we can help our congregation form itself around this. Money is a shared tool. It's a metaphor. Jesus used it a lot as a metaphor. 16 of the 40 parables, that's 40% of them, use money or stuff, possessions, as a metaphor or the object of the story. Whether it is the exact lesson or not, it's a common enough metaphor that we use it to talk about lots of different experiences. So it carries a lot in our lives. And we use our money to express all kinds of things. Are we generous or cautious, joyful or bitter, afraid or hopeful? And these aren't just binary choices. There are gradients in all of this. And that's as complicated as our story with money. Our good friend Ignatius of Loyola teaches us that the examen, that daily practice of asking questions and looking for God in our life, is a really good way to tell our own story about money and stuff. How did we make decisions today? What did we learn? What did we do right? What did we do not right? Where are the growing edges? When we look at the examen as a piece of our own stewardship storytelling, it can help us unlock those moments that we need to pay attention to. When we use the examen, this is a very brief view of hundreds of years of Ignatian spirituality, but we take a look at God's presence and we choose gratefulness when we look at our day. This choosing gratefulness is a really important concept, because when we review the actions of our day, we could choose all kinds of other things: shame, fear, grimace, anger, pride, any number of things that we might take from our day, but we choose gratefulness. We review what we've done, that experience, from all of its angles. And this helps us understand the depth of our story. We pay attention to our emotions and where the feelings start to bubble up. This helps us understand where we need to start paying more attention, where God might be doing some work, messing with the soil in the planting of our life. We take an aspect and we focus on it, and we deal with it. That helps us not take on the whole issue, my shame about my parents' spending habits. It takes one moment and dwells with it and helps me understand it. And then we ask God what we do with it at the end. This is a process to help us understand our own relationship with our own decision making when it comes to money. I give this as an example. The money autobiography and the examen is two tools we can use in small group work with our stewardship teams to help us form ourselves. Yeah, I know. So it's your stewardship committee, and you think really what you should be talking about is your pledge campaign materials and creating case statements. But when you do a little work about this, about forming yourselves, about thinking about your own theology and your own motivation and your own experiences, then we begin to understand how to work together and form yourselves. Again, this work can be hard. This work, you often don't get a rejection in church fundraising, but there are still injuries that you might take, stories that are hard to hear, experiences that feel awkward. And so when you're prepared and you have a group of people that you're walking through this work with, you can be supported and feel that you can do this. It's not easy work to raise money. So I use the examen as one side, and then I use a particular question in the money autobiography that has to do with what is the role of money throughout my life? How did it change? When it was given to me by my parents, when I had to earn it in my first jobs, when I moved through my career at different points, what did money mean to me? What was my attitude? And how did it change? And each of those milestones that I identify when we do this work in a small group, as we tell that story, it helps us understand how our own depth of experience, positive and negative, has shaped us in who we are today, and how generous we feel and how experienced we feel with money. This is just a way to help you as you create a formation program for yourselves and your committee. I'm going to move through our next slides which is about goal setting, and then we'll come back and ask questions about anything we've talked about. The final thing I want us to cover tonight is about participating with your vestry and your finance committee on setting goals for your campaign in your stewardship. So the reason I want the stewardship committee to participate in the goal setting is because I think it's really difficult to ask a group of people to be accountable for a goal that they haven't had a chance to set themselves. So when the treasurer says, this is our budget and this is how much we need to raise, and go for it, stewardship committee, I think we are really setting our stewardship committee up either for possible failure, so they don't meet the goal exactly. What does that mean? How do they feel about that? What could they have done? Was it even their fault? Were the goals realistic? When the stewardship committee, based on its own comfort and experience, can participate in the goal setting, I think we have goals that are more realistic. So what did we learn from last year's campaign? When we saw the results of our last campaign and we looked at the numbers, we assessed how it was received in the congregation. And when we asked the difficult pastoral questions about our gifts, the ones that went up and the ones that went down, what did we learn? That is one of the first data points in how we set this year's goal. There are things besides money that we should be setting goals about in our church campaigns. Does our clergy have a goal for how many new members we're hoping to attract this year? When everybody knows what that goal is, they can be focused on it. If the vestry says, we really want 10 new families this year, and lets everybody know that we want 10 new families, we can all be thinking about what's the household I could bring to this? Who can I invite into this work? Is it a goal for more volunteers or different kinds of volunteers or volunteers into different ministries? The Altar Guild is well represented, but we need people on the Education Guild, whatever. How do we set those goals and identify those people? And how can the stewardship committee, who has a role of touching everyone in the congregation, how can they help identify people? Oh, I spoke with someone who really is interested in whatever. And then you can funnel that information back up into a process and keep people focused and using their skills and being a part of the teams that are best suited for them. Make a plan for how we will lead the congregation into the next campaign. Goals should be grounded in reality, they should be achievable, and they should be aspirational. That means they should be reachable, not out of reach. So yes, push, stretch, plan, inspire, but don't make your goal raising everybody's pledge by 15% if you've never done that before in your congregation. It's one of those things that I hear vestries say sometimes. We just need everybody to increase by 15%. That never will happen. Not everybody can do that. So if you've set it as a goal, you're already failed, right? So come on, don't do that goal. What we can say is this number of people might be able to stretch and increase, or this many people who have never given before will make a gift this year. That's a goal we can all reach, or we can try to reach. It's certainly better than making these big statements, which sound great, but which are really hard to meet. Not all of our goals need to be about finances. If we have how many families we want to come, if we want to do other things that impact our fundraising, like refreshing our newsletter, updating our website, creating new materials. These are also goals that a stewardship committee can help set for the congregation. And it makes all of our work more achievable when we work toward those things with stewardship in mind. Here are a few things that could be in your plan this year for your stewardship. That you check in with the 5 highest and 5 lowest givers. Why these extremes? So it helps you understand the motivations. You're not looking to get the low givers to increase or ask the high givers what their secret is, but you're learning from their experience. This is kind of what we were talking about earlier about having a diversity of stewardship on your team, stewardship givers on your team. So check in with them, have conversations with them, ask your clergy to have coffee with the 5 lowest givers and make certain that they are feeling represented, that they're heard. What are you doing? How are you participating? Ask your diocesan stewardship officer to come and make a presentation or to give a sermon or to do a coffee hour chat. I love to do this work. So please ask me, invite me, I will be there. And if I can't be there in person because it's not time yet, I will be there virtually. I do this, I spend my Sundays in other churches doing this work and I love it. Maybe your stewardship committee will read a book on generosity, do a little book study, do a piece of formation that we've talked about. Any one of these activities can help your stewardship committee form its own cohort. Have a goal or an item in your plan that you're going to talk about stewardship all year long, that your newsletter will feature frequent updates on your mission, talk about impact, talk about where our money is going and what we're doing with it. A few articles a year rather than just at stewardship time can really help us keep the conversation going. And of course, please have a system for reminding people about where they stand with their pledge. This is really important accountability. And it's one of those things that the year moves really quickly once we get into it. And all of a sudden it's summer and people have been making their gift for several months and they don't know. Maybe they've lost track. Am I on track with my giving? Have some payments been missed? Am I not being credited for all? This is a chance for everybody to reconcile what they think they've given with what the church thinks they've given, so that we can make sure that everybody's gift is counted in the way they intended for it to be. This is always a headache for treasurers. I know it because there's never a perfect pledge statement. Somebody's is always wrong, but it's a part of the work that we do. And we've got to get them out regularly so that we can have that opportunity before pledge time for people to know where they stand. The hardest conversation I have during a pledge campaign is for somebody to say, I haven't heard anything all year about my pledge, and now you're asking me to pledge again. I don't know if you've been receiving my pledge. Other than the fact that the checks are cashed, no one's checking in with me about how it's being spent or where it's going or if it's being credited to my family. That's a really hard question to bounce back from as somebody who's asking money, because it's a failure of a system. So please make sure that your treasurer is well supported. How can your stewardship committee help this work? How can you support the finance committee or the treasurer, the vestry, in getting this work done? Finally, I will just remind you all that the Diocese of California is a member of TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. TENS has resources for annual pledge campaigns and lots of articles, and I'll be sending some of them out in the email. Job descriptions, some ministry, some stewardship committee charters and vision statements that you can use to formulate your work, and some other tools, including the Money Autobiography and the Examine, if you want to know more about them. So lots of tools for you to be able to form your team and do good stuff this year with your Stewardship and Generosity Committee. I'm going to move us back into the large group, so we have a few minutes left to ask any questions about anything or share any thoughts or experiences of what you're doing in your congregation about stewardship. Lay it on me.
This is Anita again. Couple of questions. With regard to acknowledgement, we have in our congregation people who perpetually, a handful of people who make pledges and don't fulfill them. And our practice, I understand, has not been to seek fulfillment of them. So I'm wondering how that fits in with acknowledgement, recognizing that an unfulfilled pledge does not help the annual budget. And so we have historically thanked people immediately without regard to whether they have fulfilled pledges. But I have learned this year that there has been a discrepancy between pledging and fulfillment.
Sure.
Do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah, thanks for that, Anita. And it's probably more common than it should be, but it does happen. So let me give a couple of thoughts. The first is, of course, whenever somebody fills in a pledge, whether they have a history of making it or not, we thank them regardless, because they've turned in a pledge form. We ask them to do that, so it's great. I think when we have somebody who, and this isn't what you're talking about, but when we notice somebody who usually pays their pledge suddenly stops, it's an immediate time for the clergy to call, not to say, why aren't you giving, but to say, is everything okay? What's going on?
Well, and we've had that, of course, this year.
Of course. Let us know what's going on. We want to be here to support you. How can we help you? I think it's also really one of the other reasons that people don't fulfill their pledge is because their circumstances change throughout the year. So maybe in December, when they made their pledge, they were fully employed and life was great. And then some things changed throughout the year and they weren't able to fulfill it. And rather than saying, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this year, they just stop or they slow or whatever. So some education up front. I always say this during stewardship season. I say it in the acknowledgement. If you need to change the terms, we are here for you. It can be as simple as an email to the treasurer or to the rector. Not everybody has to know. And just say, I'll get to it, or I'm going to stop, or I can't do it at all, or I'm going to change it from this to that. I mean, the church is here to help. And then the question from whoever gets that information is there anything we can do to support you? Do you need prayers? Do you need food dropped off at your house? What's going on? How can we help you?
Okay.
Those habitual folks who fill out a pledge form every year and don't do it, and every church has some of it exists. That's where I think we do a little bit more intentional work. When that pledge form comes in, or when that person doesn't fulfill their pledge after the third year or something like that, it might be time for a question, a really honest question from the clergy, to say, you don't have to fill out a pledge form. to be a member of this church. If, there are lots of ways that you can indicate your support and your membership here. We really want you to fill out a pledge, but if you felt pressured, I'm here to tell you that you're a child of God and you're welcome here, and we're going to love you and serve you and be a home for you. And some people just, they hear the call, they think it is somehow associated with membership rather than participation. And they fill out a pledge form out of some kind of like strange sense of guilt or appropriate action. And I think it's as simple as having an honest, direct conversation. It needs to come from the clergy. It should not come from the treasurer or a member of the stewardship committee, because it's pastoral and it's private. But I think it is damaging to everyone to have somebody consistently fill out a pledge form and not fill it out. They can't feel good about that. It messes with the budget. And it doesn't need to happen. And so I think there are really appropriate ways to say, what is the way you'd like to participate in our fundraising? Would you like to just put a gift in the plate as it comes by and call it good when you can? What do you want? Help us help you. But I think it's important after some time, after some number of cycles, to acknowledge it and not just keep writing it off. But it's also important to write those off. I was dealing with a congregation recently who had kept unfulfilled pledges on their books for like a long time. And it was just dragging their finances down. And all of a sudden they were like, they wiped it off their books and discovered they had a surplus. So, so don't let your accounting get messed up from people who linger with unpaid pledges.
Okay.
Good question, Anita.
Oh, I do have another question, and I don't mean to hog, but my other question is, and maybe this is for a different Thursday, is there ever a time at which one might list everybody that has participated, not by number, but just by name, and not in any level?
Yep.
But just by name, as to acknowledge that, look at how many people are participating.
I've seen that done in all kinds of ways, and I think every one of them that I've seen is appropriate, as long as it separates number from name.
Yeah.
So I've seen congregations say, we had 98% of families participate and let's celebrate it. Or some of them list the names of everyone, every household. And what they don't do is list the ones that, like we haven't heard from the Smiths yet, so
Right.
You don't do that piece, but you just do the positive piece. It's really, really helpful to do that work. We do it in our other nonprofits, right? So like when you get an annual report from the nonprofit that you support, or maybe you go to the YMCA and you see the donor wall and you see who's supporting it, right? We do that kind of work in other places. And so we can list names without having to say how much they give or what they do. I think it's just really helpful, because then it shows the whole family, right? It shows us all. And there's always the little italicized point at the bottom. If you haven't made your commitment yet and you'd like to, here's how you can. And it's a good reminder. If you don't see your name on the list and you'd like it there, we have a way for that.
Thank you. That was something I had frankly urged and had been discouraged from doing that. But I just think it makes it, and particularly at this point where we're really in a rebuilding and trying to affirm those who have remained loyal through,
Mhm.
yeah,
As long as it's not a tool of shame or who's in and who's out.
no,
If it turns into something like that, then it goes really bad really quickly. But if it's a tool of honor,
yeah.
and just naming people who you're grateful that they can participate, that's wonderful. So,
And, there are people, there are people who are participating at, $5. Doesn't, and their name is there.
their name
Yeah.
is there. Every gift counts.
Yeah, so that's something I would like to,
I like it. It's a beautiful idea.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We are at our time, but if there's a last question that anyone has, I'm happy to answer it before we sign off this evening. All right, friends. Thank you for participating. I really appreciate your questions and your time. I will send you an email as soon as this is posted to the website with the links and with everything else that I've mentioned tonight, and get it out to you so you can continue the learning in your congregation. Really appreciate you in these fourth Thursdays. Look forward to seeing you next month. Take care.